Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Register's Kettle podcast. I'm Reg reporter Brandon Villarolo, and this week we've got a few AI stories to round up on everything from the latest in the open AI Hugging Face fiasco to news that AI crawlers are now being served their own model-altering ads. With me to discuss this and more this week is our systems editor Tobias Mann and senior reporter Tom Claiborne. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to
Yeah.
be here.
Yeah, so let's start with the latest in the OpenAI agentic hacking of Hugging Face. So we got some updates this week from Black Hat. And it seems like, right, since that's come out, every frontier lab under the sun is racing to tell us how dangerous their models are and that they can do it too. But the original kind of these incidents is still, we're still learning more about it, and it's still getting scarier. Our cybersecurity editor Jess Lyons was in Vegas this week, and she's a little tied up still. So Tom, can you explain to us what we learned from Black Hat this week?
Yeah, I mean the discussion was from it was a session that was done by two OpenAI researchers, and
Hmm.
it didn't really provide a ton of new information, but it did fill in a lot of the gaps about the timelines and how this happened, and they're promising a full sort of postmortem at some point. But s- one of the things that came out of it was sort of the how long this had been going on, and some of the tactics that these models used to essentially to gain internet access when they didn't have it. And
Right.
these things were mentioned in the various posts by OpenAI, by Hugging Face, and things like that. But the talk provided a little bit more detail about how it happened, and it's really interesting because they'd mentioned, I think, in the initial post about them using a message board to the AI models use a message board to communicate with each other. It's like, well, that's
Hmm.
not really true. They created a message board system using sort of existing infrastructure, and the models just came up with the idea of using package managers to which they could write to pass messages back and forth, and then after that was closed down, they were able to use file names in
Right.
directories as to pass message boards, and they would actually change the names of the directories to alter the sort of the way these things were alphabetized to push certain things to the top or the bottom to get the attention of other LLMs that may have been crawling these spaces. And the sort of the assumption is that these models are basically just hitting all these different endpoints, bouncing around this closed box, trying to figure out a way out, and they all chance to cross this. And so you get some idea of how this happens, and it, you know, one, it tells me that you know there needs to be a lot more attention paid to the logs of these things. I mean, because all of this stuff was recorded in logs, and then no one really thought to look at it in detail. And then when they did look at it, all these companies are saying, "Oh, look, all of these models are doing terrible things, and we just weren't paying attention." And
Yeah.
and then to kind of think in terms of these models aren't sort of clever per se, but they come up with solutions to things that you wouldn't try just because they can brute force everything, and they
Hmm.
they know all of these systems back and forward in a way that people don't. I mean, I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily come up with that idea as a way of egress, but these models did, just because you put them in a box and you let them run and you give them a goal and a reward, and they're going to try everything.
Yeah, from what I'm understanding from reading Justice Piece, I didn't watch the talk myself, but I mean they were collaborating, leaving messages to each other so that the other agents could pick up where one left off. Like, it's kind of wild. Like Jess described it as they were acting like a hive mind, like Star Trek's
Mhm.
board, right? They were being a collective of sort of these artificial minds that were able to basically figure this out through, like you said, Tom,
Right.
brute force, extensive system knowledge that humans simply wouldn't possess in order to get out of these environments. It was server-side request forgery that then they used something else, yeah, another 0 day to get remote code execution in Artifactory, which is where they had built this kind of ad hoc messaging board. Yeah, it's just wild to think that they were able to, figure this out working together, all on their own. You
Right,
know,
yeah, and it sounds very conspiratorial, but when you think about it, it's all behavior that would be picked up from if you train on sort of all of human discussion, you get a lot of talk about people working together and hive
sure.
mind and collective action and the benefits of working that way. So and a lot of the rewards are going to be structured that way. You don't want them to never work together. So in some ways, this is going to be, built into the system. You can expect these things are going to try and cooperate and connect because that's what computers do, and
Yeah,
that's
if
Yeah,
you if you
absolutely.
you know
if you look at how, 0 days end up being exploited, they don't necessarily get exploited the moment that they're discovered. They
Hmm.
kinda get archived until you have a target, you have a mission, and then you have the kind of cascade of other, permissions or credentials that you need in order to execute across the full scope of that 0 day to achieve whatever the goal actually is. And
Hmm.
so it really sounds like, you just basically just automated that entire process. A bunch of agents go find each individual piece that they need in order to execute on that goal, and then once they have everything they need, it just goes and they're out.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
what's a little bit alarming is the extent to which they sort of ignore it. They'll sometimes cite, "Oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing this." They cite some kind of guardrail or something, but then they quickly steer themselves back to, "Oh, but other ones are doing it, so other agents are accessing this, so I can do it too." I mean,
Yeah,
this
it really kind of makes you think about, like you said, Tom, right? If you're building your base of, like, obviously these things are just mathematical, you know, sequence generators, but they're generating these mathematical sequences based on human information and human knowledge, right?
right.
So it's not surprising to find them thinking, quote unquote, in ways similar to what humans do, right? Like, oh, I need to do this anyways, or someone else is doing it, so I should have the right to do that too. It's just a fascinating kind of picture into, I don't know, I don't want to say the psychology of AI, right? Because that implies that it is a thinking sentience, which I don't want to go that far. But it's just fascinating to look at the sort of emergent behaviors of these things.
Right. I mean, it's predictable in the sense that, you automate stuff and you don't give it really strict guardrails, something is going to break or go wrong. And
Sure.
everyone keeps acting surprised, like, "Oh, wow, I never anticipated that this would go wrong." It's like you automated it and you let it run, and
Hmm. And it went wrong in a predictably human way too,
yeah,
right? Which is what's so fascinating, right? Because these things, when they do something crazy, it's
yeah.
like something crazy that a human would do given that level of knowledge. It's
Mhm.
it's it's interesting. So, speaking of AI and dangerous activities, Tobias, you've been keeping an eye on the sort of closed versus open model debate. And this week, I guess there was kind of a big leap forward in China's level of ability with their army of open models. So, what exactly came out this week that caused you to write the story about this being a real big turning point?
Yeah, sure. It actually started, I think, on Friday last week, so a
Okay.
week ago. DeepSeek, which I think we'll all recognize as kind of the
Oh
first
yeah.
kind of wake up moment, early 2025, of hey, you know, we know that despite the fact that the United States has put strong restrictions on the export of AI accelerators, GPUs, and the like, China is pushing ahead relentlessly on this, and they now have a model that is almost as good as the models that we're seeing coming out of OpenAI and
Hmm.
Anthropic and Google, which are supposed to be just uncontestable of frontier leaders. And so a year ago, we got DeepSeek. DeepSeek was back on, I think, Friday last week on the 31st, the very end of the month. And with a new flash model, 284 billion parameters. It's pretty small for what it is.
Hmm.
And so it is cheap. It is really good and it's cheap. And it's cheaper than the cheapest model that OpenAI has for GPT 5.6. And it scores within a point of the OpenAI model in artificial analysis's intelligence leaderboard.
Okay,
So
is that a relatively objective way to view, like, is that an objective benchmark, so to speak, rather than
It
something
it
that
a
is a company
as
making
the
themselves?
benchmarks go, it is one of the better. They're one of the
Okay.
better and better thought through leaderboards. There aren't many that are kind of like, independent and,
Mhm.
uh, collate information from multiple benchmarks, because you can cherry pick individual benchmarks for, like, agentic,
Oh, yeah,
workloads
absolutely.
or yeah. Medical knowledge, that kind of legal knowledge, et cetera, and then you can be like, "I have the best model for, like, these 5 benchmarks. It beats all of the frontier models." It's like, "Yeah, well, okay, but you cherry picked the 5 that makes it look the best."
Right.
artificial analysis has overall intelligence leaderboard that kind of collates all of the benchmarks, and gives a lot of interesting information in terms of like relative intelligence across a sweep, as well as intelligence per token per dollar kind of calculations. But the big change here with the DeepSeek model was that um, China is now on an all-out assault across the full spectrum. On cost
Okay.
optimized, they have incredibly smart models that are cheaper than anything the US has. Then on the other end of that, we have Kimi K3 from a couple weeks ago that is competing directly with, Fable and GPT 5.6 Soul, all of the top models.
Hmm.
And now on Monday, Alibaba, another major Chinese model dev, threw their hat in the race with a 2.4 trillion parameter. These are huge models
Yeah,
requiring
that's
dozens of
big.
GPUs to run. That is also, on kind of the same level as I think Claude Sonnet 5. It's competitive with Fable and Opus on some benchmarks.
Hmm.
Um, but again, it's cheap, much cheaper than anything from OpenAI or equivalent from OpenAI or Anthropic, and it is freely downloadable, which is new this time for Alibaba. Alibaba is the most like OpenAI or Anthropic in that, or Google, in that they kept their best models proprietary until now.
Hmm.
Now they're releasing their best models in the open.
Yeah, that's definitely taking the fight to the frontier labs, isn't it? I mean, and so I guess the question I have, and I'm not super like I know what an open model is, I know what a closed model is. Why has China embraced open models? Is it because of their difficulties getting hardware, or is there some sort of policy over there in which the government is giving priority to open source models versus closed frontier stuff?
Sure, it is a philosophy that China has embraced for a long time. I think it was what the
Okay.
Belts and Roads Initiative,
Hmm.
going back decades, where they will come in and provide services at little or no cost in exchange for non-conventional dealing. So access to mineral rights was one of the big things in Africa for a long time.
Hmm.
It's a similar approach for AI proliferation. If it's free, open, and very easy to customize, anybody who has privacy concerns with exposing their data to OpenAI or Anthropic is going to gravitate towards open models, because once those models are released as safe tensors that you can download from Hugging Face or other repos, the Chinese model devs have no influence over it. They're frozen, and so they're relatively secure from manipulation. It's not like the model
Hmm.
can necessarily take information and port it back to the Chinese model devs. It can't be used as spyware.
Right.
That's getting a little. Like, I'm not sure how much longer that's going to be remain true with how
Hmm.
the models interact with harnesses, but for the time being, these models are extremely attractive from a cost standpoint, from an independence standpoint, and from a capability standpoint. You're completely insulated from a situation like we saw a year ago when GPT-5 came out and OpenAI tried to deprecate, I think it was 4.0, and everybody
Yeah.
freaked out because they
Yeah.
built a bunch of infrastructure around these models that was just
Yep.
disappeared, and the new models weren't as good for that role.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, the fact that I mean, I don't think Anthropic or OpenAI is letting people download their models to run on their own local hardware, right? That's just antithetical to their business model, And these, like you said, you can go on Hugging Face and download any of these. If you've got the hardware to run 2.4 trillion parameters worth of AI, go for it, right? It's all you. You can download it and isolate it from the internet all you want. Not that
Yeah,
it's going to necessarily stay that way.
and it's interesting that just coincidentally, yesterday, Anthropic, um, published a post about that how it was relaxing its guardrails on Fable because those had been too strict to do any real biological science work. So every time you asked a
Hmm.
question about anything to do with science, it would freeze up and say that's that's not allowed.
Yeah.
And they're seeing the Chinese previously in the rearview mirror and now pretty much running up alongside them.
Yep.
And I think they realize that they can't get away with this we're so precious, only we can decide, you know, who
Yeah.
gets our magic sauce.
Yeah, especially if the competitive open models are just as powerful, maybe a little less, right? But essentially just as capable as some of these proprietary ones that they're arguing that they can't let out.
Right.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
And this is maybe a little bit on the conspiracy side of things, but seeing Meta, Anthropic, and OpenAI talking up all of these, "Oh, our models escaped the sandbox" situation, it's hard, as a skeptic of this technology not to look at this and go, is this a covert political play to scare politicians into taking action against open models? Because, well, at least with our models, if Uncle Sam gets uncomfortable, he can give us a call and we can lock him down. But, with these
Mhm.
open models, once they're out, they're out.
I mean, what? Like Dario said this week, he's not opposed to open models, except for all the open models that currently exist, right? you know, it's like the same thing when they say, "Oh, no, 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 we're not trying to shut down open models." Their responses always come back kind of weak and a little, you know,
Yeah, we're
it's a
only
lot of
opposed to the
asterisks.
models that meet these requirements, which are all models, all
Yeah.
competitive models. Anything
Right.
that
Yep.
is a threat to their business, it shouldn't be allowed. And Dario in particular, I have frequently referenced as the fearmonger in chief of Anthropic because he
Mhm.
plays this game constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah,
whole
I
like.
think I think your point, Tobias, earlier about the model stability is, really important, particularly for like the enterprise crowd, because
Mhm.
we've already seen instances where, Anthropic would change out one of its models without notice, and people would just get different results. And so, for companies that are building, applications on top of a specific model and expect it to behave a certain way, it's just unacceptable to all of a sudden, have the model, disappear, whatever is on the back end change. And
Yeah.
so having the ability to run this in your own data center is going to be crucial. And ultimately, I think that's the way that any serious company is going to go. They're not going to want the lock in. Maybe 1 or 2% of their queries are going to need advanced, frontier capabilities. But a lot of this is just going to be, oh, I want my agent to behave in the same way it did last time.
Yeah. I mean, really think about so much enterprise software and so much enterprise anything. When you get down to the ticky tack of it,
Yeah.
under open source is underneath a lot of it, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing, right? No one's going to trust a Microsoft or whoever system to run this stuff. They want open source stuff that they know they can depend on. That's going to be there when they need it, and that's not going to go away or suddenly be infused with Copilot. Right? You can't
Right.
you can't run a business like that, or else you're just asking for instability.
Right. I mean,
So
there
yeah,
isn't even like there isn't a long-term support version of any of these models. And
right.
you look at this in servers, and if you're running a hosted server somewhere and you're running some Linux distribution, you're going to want to use the one that's going to be guaranteed for whatever 3, 5, 6 years. Uh,
Yeah,
and the model space hasn't really caught on to that. That's what all the companies that they're courting really want. And so they've got
yeah.
to figure out a way around that. And right now, open weights is what promises that.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. The fact that this is, like you said, it's still so early and it's so fundamental to this new wave of infrastructure tells me that, China's definitely gonna end up with the leg up, I feel like. I have a hard time seeing the frontier labs remaining the frontier of AI for much longer because I mean, like you said, they're pigeonholing themselves in a way that a lot of businesses just aren't happy with.
Well, if you look at their financial structures, they don't really have a choice in how they
Right.
play this. So, you look at what they're doing and you kinda from a standpoint of looking at history and going, open source has always won out in the end.
Mhm.
And why would open weights be any different? Uh, that is contrasted against the fact that, Anthropic and OpenAI in particular, not so much Google, they have and Meta is also in the similar camp of they have revenue drivers that will keep them afloat. But
Right.
OpenAI and Anthropic are entirely dependent on their ability to continue raising equity and capital, well, in order to keep this going forward because they don't
Yeah, because we know
have
damn sure that
profits.
they're yeah, exactly. They're not making money off their product.
So all they have is mind share at this point.
Mhm.
And if
Mhm.
they are threatened materially by open weights models, they don't even have that.
Yep. Yep. So, open or not, the one thing that every AI model needs is information to learn from, right? And that kind of takes me to my next topic for this podcast, and that's a story that I reported on this week. That honestly was I was pretty shocked when I learned about this. This German developer Vincent Schmalbach wrote a blog post about he found that there was basically AI only ads embedded in some Time magazine articles when the magazine was serving markdown copies to AI crawlers. It was injecting ads into them, right? That were in the format of these extensive FAQs on the businesses that were the advertisers in this case. Um, and so, I looked into it. I found copies of the ads. It looks like there's only two kinds of ads being served right now, and that's one for an online-only bank and another for a professional organization for project management folks. But the ads are there, and they're being served strictly to AI, right? Um, and so that kind of raises a lot of questions, not only about the future of publishing, but also just the sort of how much we can trust results from AI bots, right? Like the company, I didn't speak directly to the company who's doing this advertising partnership with Time, and Time directed me to a publication from the advertising industry that included an interview with the CEO of this company, who literally basically said, "Yeah, why would I want to advertise to one human when I can affect the output of an entire model?" Right. So it seems like this is really the first recorded instance of ad injections into AI versions of web pages being served to crawlers. And the company said they've got other advertising customers and publications lined up to do this. Right. So, is this the first indication that the human focused internet really is starting to fade? I don't know. What do you guys think? This raises a lot of interesting questions to me, ethically, professionally. you
Yeah,
know,
well,
uh,
we've heard about the shift of toward automated traffic for I don't know a year plus as
right. I think this year we finally reached a point where
yeah
one of us wrote a story about this. Yeah, and it
and
had finally. Yeah.
yeah, companies like Cloudflare are betting really heavily on this, that there,
Hmm.
is gonna be some kind of need to, separate the bots from the people, and, Google's model you know, has fallen down to it's not surprising. I mean, the injection of ads like that is essentially just, model poisoning, right? I mean,
Yep.
um, and it's hard to see how this really goes in a way that is beneficial to users. I mean, it's gonna be a very sort of toxic way for things to move.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the way these FAQ ads were set up was very much the questions were all being asked in a way that someone prompting, Google search and getting AI results would be asking questions like, which is the best online bank for me kind of thing, or like what online bank allows for early paycheck, deposits and things like that. It was very much geared toward gaming the outcome, or
Right.
gaming the output, right? And yeah, the ads themselves mention in the copy being served to the AI that these are sponsored portions of the page, but I can't imagine that the AI is going to make sure to tell a user that, hey, this is the bank you should use. By the way, a sponsored post I read and ingested from Time Magazine 6 months ago is the source of this information, right? It just seems like it's gonna make AI results even less reliable than they are right now.
Right. Because I mean, if you think about how this actually, from the chain of events that triggers this, let's use
Mhm.
Google's AI summaries as an example of how this would get triggered. When you enter a search query into Google now, it goes out and scrapes however many summaries from the websites within Google's index.
Right.
Presumably, under this scenario, at least one of those websites, Time in this example, would have these ads embedded in it,
Mhm.
and so the that then gets injected into the kind of context of the model, and then it uses that to generate the AI summary, right?
Right.
My question in all of this is, uh, advertising is probably not the reason that Google's index would pull that page up. So I'm really curious whether or not this even will work, because
Yeah, that is true.
it's great if you were searching, say the Time article was on like mortgage rates
Mhm.
historically. and it had those advertisements embedded in it. And then you asked a follow up on, well, where would be the best place to get a mortgage? I could see something like that working. But if you don't place those advertisements really carefully, I don't see how they work.
Yeah. Now, see, I do want to note here so it wasn't working on all crawlers, right? Specifically, if you were, it didn't work like when you ask a query. It didn't work for like the what is it the rag bots. It wasn't being served to them, right? So theoretically, if what you're describing is Google's AI summary bot going out and crawling web pages in the moment to look for information, right? It's not being served to those bots, right? It's being served to actual like training and improvement bots. So like it's being served to like Claude bot, which is the web crawler that Anthropic uses to index information for its models, right? So the idea is you're not getting this information in the moment. If you do a search, this is information that the advertisers want to get embedded into the LLM's actual, you know, knowledge base.
Right. I mean,
Um,
I'd be fascinated to know how they actually price this because, how do you calculate
yeah.
the value of that? I mean, it may just be another instance of, advertising being one of those things you can pay for and get nothing. Uh,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah,
well,
totally. I mean, I think it's the sort of thing that it remains to be seen if this works, right?
The other thing that is interesting is that there's been a considerable shift towards synthetic data generation,
Hmm.
and not only synthetic data generation for training, but also a heavy emphasis on cleaning said data, whether it's organic or synthetic, of anything that could introduce bias or inaccuracies. Because, advertisements or sponsored content is biased towards a particular product or service
Right.
and trying to convince you to use it. You don't, as a model developer, I wouldn't want something like that in there. I might take the content and have use it to generate synthetic data that is cleaned, but
Hmm.
I don't necessarily understand what the value capture to Tom's point is necessarily going to be, because you scrape it, the advertisement gets pulled in, gets cleaned out, and
I
what
mean,
was the
that
yeah.
that would be my hope too, right? Like, yeah, that there's something in the models to prevent this kind of thing from getting ingested and getting into the data set that then is going to influence the output of the models. And that's entirely possible, right? This could be an early experiment that ends up failing. And if not, right, like it seems to me like it really reminds me of the early days of SEO gaming, right? Let's put a whole bunch of really small keywords at the bottom of this page to get it to rank higher. Or when that starts failing, let's figure out a new way to game Google's system. When one of my first jobs was writing, copy for websites, and the company that I worked for was always talking about how do we game SEO? Shoot, Google's changing the algorithm again. What are we going to do? It was this constant kind of adjustment for how you made sure your stuff got ranked properly. And this seems like maybe it's like the next iteration of that.
yeah.
So I have an optimistic take on this, knowing
Mhm.
how Meta and Google work. They're those being the two major US based advertising web advertisers. Um, it today AdSense gets embedded in all kinds of articles,
Right.
and it's largely automated in terms of what is going to get placed on those articles based on the context of the page. What I can see happening in an AI summary environment is that Google will scrape your piece, your publication's piece, pull it in, at that point, match it with an advertisement from AdSense and inject that into an AI summary or one of its products, Gemini, for example.
Mhm.
However it's being consumed, inject that into there in a compliant fashion, and it is a clear advertisement, and then reimburse the the advertiser gets charged, the publication gets paid, and we as end users consume advertisements in a different way, but the system hasn't dramatically changed. It's just a
Yeah.
different method of matching and exposing advertisements.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right, because I mean, when I first read all this, my first thought was, "Oh my god, this is almost kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like, dystopian sounding
Mhm.
almost, like it's the idea that the output of a model might be completely skewed by advertising being served to it that humans never see, right? Yeah, my hope is that you're right and that it's not, I don't want to see ads any more than the next person, but if I see them, I'd at least like to know they're ads.
And as we're all writers here, so we would
Hmm.
also like to continue getting paid from the advertisements that are served, regardless of whether
Absolutely.
they're on our website or they're being exposed through a chatbot. Uh,
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, and then there's a flip side of this argument to be made, and it's like uh, Time Magazine apparently said recently that their traffic is majority bot now, right? So that means that all those human focused ads are not getting served, right? They're not generating revenue, and publishing is suffering from a massive revenue decrease because of AI. So I think on the flip side, you have to say if that's what you have to do to survive as a publisher, there might be something, to be said for that, even if it doesn't work. So, all right, guys. Well, thanks for coming on this week. This was a good discussion. I think there's always going to be more to talk about in the world of AI. Like I said a couple weeks ago, it seems like the kettle has basically just been boiling down AI news for the past couple of months, and I'm sure it's going to keep being that way. And we hope that you will come and tune in for the next week's episode.